Hey guys, good morning. And in today's episode, I want to talk a little bit about abuse and abusers. And I know that we have had commentators on this channel, and I talked about abusive relationships, and more so coming from the perspective of having not really experienced abusive relationships. But one thing I'm learning as I'm getting older and navigating communities where violence is normalized, right? And when I say communities, we can just kind of cut straight to the chase and, be forward. In Black communities specifically, right? Especially when you're coming from a lower socioeconomic background, I think a lot of times people always think like severe poverty, and that is the case, right? I think the reason why we don't really look at poverty in the same way in our modern society as we did post civil rights and we were fighting for equality is because we consume materialism, right? So it's easy to kind of look a certain type of way today, right? You can there's just a lot of different ways that you can go about really presenting yourself in a certain type of way today. It's basically what I'm saying, versus before, poverty in itself was something that was a little bit more self-presenting. Today, you can kind of masquerade around it. You can be someone who is charismatic. You can focus on your personality, right? Like there's a lot of different factors that kind of go into this. And stay with me as I really break this down. So when we see, when we talk about poverty, I think that we look at it in a different context, and we actually think that it's something that's almost like non-existent. We think of like, ratty haired people on the street who are homeless, and I don't say that to be insensitive. I say that to say that's kind of what the media has portrayed. So when you start talking about being from or living within impoverished locations, right? Deprivation within geographic locations, and within a certain demographic, you will find that violence is very normalized within these communities. And it's not always a matter of like violence in terms of physical abuse, right? And I don't even know if I can say that on YouTube. I know that like YouTube is like pretty sensitive with the wordplay, so I'm hoping that this doesn't get flagged. But then again, I only have like 400 followers, so I really don't think it's going to be that deep. But one thing I've realized growing up in these communities is that violence is normalized, right? General reports, right? The Colonel report, all these different reports about Black communities and Black life do center around more of a criminal violence. But the violence that I'm going to be talking about today is what is emotional violence, right? In previous episodes, you guys can talk and take a look where I was talking about just religion and, spiritual abuse, which is also going to be one of the umbrellas, right? When we talk about violence within these communities. But there is emotional violence. There is, spiritual violence. There is psychological violence, right? And those are the things that we don't really talk about. I personally don't understand abusers and what it is about them that makes them set out to literally destroy and to corrupt other people. And this is why we always talk about not throwing the baby out with bathwater when it comes to faith, because faith is one of those things where you need some justification to feel the whole and the clarity where there is none, right? So let's think about abusers, right? You very seldom see abusers coming. I don't think anybody just kind of walks in and they're like, yeah, I'm an abuser. But something that's so evident to me is that we're very ready in these communities. And let me just say this too, because I want to make it very plain. I want to make it very clear. Okay. When I say these communities, I'm specifically talking about the Black community. Okay. I'm saying poverty. I think we want to talk about classism when I say poverty, and I came in with that introduction, but no, it's really giving the Black community. Like that's what I'm saying. But when you start talking about violence and you start talking about abuse, especially against women, it is something that is normalized. You can look at that from a lot of different perspectives. You can say it's the Black female body. You can say, women are marginalized in society. You can say Black men are victims, which I think that this is also why this abuse is so normalized. I once heard a commentator come on and say that Black women really protect Black men. And, you know, it was such an aha moment in that very brief, you know, it was very revelatory because it was true, right? And so instead of a lot of times us sharing our experiences with abuse, i.e. P. Diddy, what happens is that it's accumulative, because that's true. So many Black women protect Black men. And this is why it's like when, you know, when it was, I cannot think of his name. I cannot, you know, y'all know the football player. OJ Simpson. When it was OJ Simpson, we were so quick to side with OJ and be like, oh no, he wouldn't do that. Same thing with your boy Jonathan Majors. Oh no, Black man. You see what I'm saying? And it's like, I'm reading Bell Hooks and I'm reading Salvation, and it just talks about how women, Black women and white women alike, were very readily able to forgive Black men for the violence that they committed against women, right? And obviously we're not talking just solely physical violence, but the violence that they perpetuate in their communities is because we see Black men as victims in modern society, right? We see them as people who are helpless, who can't find stable employment. You know, all these myths that really center around victimization, which just don't really reign true. I can honestly say from my personal experience, environmental factors play a huge role in determining a person's success, right? A lot of times Black people just in general are really stuck in a crab in a barrel type of thing. It's really hard to get out of the ghetto. Like, people don't understand that, right? It's not just a matter of systemic or institution. Like, that's not even the plight anymore. Like, you can't even get in the system or get to these institutions because you have all of these environmental factors on top of the communal violence. Okay, it is really hard to get out of those communities when you have communal violence. So there's that. And we won't take that away from the collective Black experience. That's every Black person trying to get it out the mud and become something, right? But what we are going to talk about is kind of just uprooting that myth and really kind of shining a light on the reality that a lot of Black men, on average, are not looking for educational opportunities, right? They are still encouraged by Du Bois and very old ideologies that center around trade school, that center around industrialization. So, and many times you can say there may be socialization around Black men, you know, working more laborious jobs and more industrial jobs. But the reality is that not many Black men are desiring to be scholars, right? Not many Black men are desiring to be professors or engineers or to participate in that way. And when I say on average, again, I'm talking about communally, okay? Communally. And I'm talking about the vast majority, right? I'm not talking about this small pool of exceptional Black men. I'm not talking about this small pool of exceptional Black boys who are socialized, who are encouraged in their education and their academic studies. No, I'm talking about the vast majority of Black boys who maybe aspire to be some type of athlete or to be some type of entertainer. And when that doesn't work out, then you have a large body of people on this side of the fence. And that's how the class is divided, okay? It's not really systemic as much as we really want to talk about it. And I think this is also something too, you know, this video is all over the place, but I think this is also something too, we kind of have to give some type of heedance when we talking about, you know, Black bourgeoisie. And I don't want to use that lightly because I feel like there's a little bit more context with the Black bourgeoisie, and I don't want to make it seem like it's like, oh, you know, the boule, like, you know, this is why we should defend. And that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying, because like I said, I feel like that was more context. What I am saying is that I can clearly see why there is such class division. Okay? Because you have this group of people who are generally just ignorant, right? And you have this other group of people who are not. And anywhere you go in society, it's going to be really hard to be in these environments where you are someone who is not ignorant and you're surrounded around people who are ignorant. And unfortunately, the other side is the vast majority. I don't know where I was going with that, but I'm tying this up to we talk about abuse and we talk about the violence that is normalized against Black women. I don't think we talk enough about the psychological violence, and I really have a lot of empathy, understanding, and overall just like, I fully get it now. You know what I mean? Like why so many women are decentering men. I personally, I'll always kind of say this. I genuinely don't think that Black women and white women's plight are the same. It's never really been the same. And I don't think that we're really fighting for the same things. I don't think we're on the same team in terms of like women's rights and all of those different things, because what was very evident to me is that white women are going to uphold and sustain patriarchy. So in all the same ways that Black women tend to protect Black men against the violence that they commit against Black women, white women are going to do the same. White women are going to do the same. And so when it comes to women's rights and being met in this space where it's like, wow, we are women, we have to stand together, white women are typically going to follow the rules of patriarchy. They're typically going to support and uphold, certain doctrination or certain legalities and certain things that would actually oppress Black women, but they're going to sustain patriarchy, and it's legalistic and it makes more sense. And it's like, that's the right thing to do, right? Instead of really leaning on this whole advocacy, which is like women's rights. You know what I mean? Like, so I think I call BS. I've always been calling BS, just because I just feel like I've seen it in my own life, when things hit the fan, when it's really time for us to stand arm in arm, when it's really time for us to really go up against the system that oppresses us, white women are going to maintain and sustain that system because they want their rightful place in society right next to the patriarchal white man. So very seldom are they willing to, I don't want to say break the rules, but I mean, isn't that kind of what feminism is all about, right? It's kind of, it's about, women's rights and all the things that they advocate for. It's about going against conventionalism, and those women are not typically willing to do that, especially not for Black life and Black women specifically. So that's just the truth. I think for them, it feels good to maybe have like a space to have some type of liberation, to be able to, create campaigns and to create a bit of an uproar and to be seen as they've always been seen, right? Plastered in front of our magazines. That is me paraphrasing my poem. But yeah, I think like at the end of the day, when it comes to really advocating for Black women, and really, bearing arms with all women, I don't think that that's something they're actually willing to do. But yeah, this video is kind of long-winded. I just wanted to come on and say that to the women who are or have experienced violence, in our communities, and it doesn't have to be physical, I understand. Right. It wasn't even until like the 70s that domestic violence has actually become a crime. Right. Like women were being beat and it was so normalized. I don't even know if it was even the late, maybe even not even the 1970s. It was like 1980s. You know what I mean? Like late 70s, 80s, like where it was actually a crime to like literally beat your wife and your children. And so fast forward, and that violence is then, translated into psychological violence. And right now I'm doing a lot of research on women in hysteria and women who were hospitalized due to their husbands coming out stating that the women were insane because the women were not compliant, the women were not subservient enough, and the women just, we're being women, and it's pretty deep. And so I think what typically happens in America, and this is why I always talk about the myth of progression, and I'm going to end with this. We don't really progress, right? Everything that we do, it just kind of contorts itself to fit our modern day and our present day, right? So the violence that men commit against women and the heinous crimes that go undetected don't just go away, right? They don't go away with the Me Too movement. They don't just stop. No, those crimes and those things are then translated into other forms of violence, right? And that's the pretty sick thing. And so I completely understand why women are decentering men. It's not a matter of male hating. It's a matter of protection. And I don't see how we don't see this as a bigger call to advocacy, right? This is not something that's a lighthearted thing, right? And so what you have and what this is built on is the paradigm that men are stronger, better, smarter, right? Women are emotional, right? So when we hold these beliefs, that's what we get. And then because of the lack of education, because America is so anti-intellectual and we're socialized to believe these things about women, any woman who is not that is defiant, and she needs to be put in her place. She needs to be punished. She needs to be ridiculed. She is domineering, right? She is not feminine. Right. And that's what we see. And these are the arguments that have been consistent, because when you talk to any male who is, within a certain socioeconomic, educational, and demographic background, that's the answer that you're going to get. There's no such thing as debate and critical thinking. We just seen that there was an article with The Atlantic where the top universities, they can't even read. They don't even read books. You know what I mean? And when you think about just the faultiness within the American institutions, it's like everybody is going to school to study one specialized thing, right? They're not reading freaking Toni Morrison to Asada, to Jodi Picoult, to freaking Napoleon Hill, to Don Manuel Ruiz, to freaking, John Gray, to Hannah Jones, right? Like, it doesn't exist. Will Haygood, right? Like, it doesn't exist, right? People typically have, when we talk about education, it's a very specialized education. It's not about independent study. And we know within our society, independent study is discouraged. And it is oftentimes discredited. So all I'm saying is I see you. I see you. And I think as women, let us not overlook that, right? If a woman is, frantic and frazzled, it's likely someone psychologically playing on her mind, right? And this is something that's just been normalized. You can look at it in any field, right? And I'll end with this because I'm kind of rambling at this point, but you can look at the psychological violence that is committed against women in any aspect, psychology. I'm going to talk specifically about I'm going to reference rather the medical field, right? We hear all the time Black women, and they're not heard when they're giving birth and things like that. You have all these biases, right? And even with women going through things in life, right? So you have two genders, right? Heterosexual, it's norm, right? The normative, right? And you have the one gender who's non-expressive, and then you have the gender that is expressive, and they have completely different parts. And so what you're going to do is comparatively, you're going to be like, well, the gender that is, non-expressive is normal, cool, calm, collected, and composed. Whereas the gender that is expressive, you're going to be like, oh, this person is irrational, right? This person needs to be medicated. You know what I mean? This person, and there's no wonder why there's so many women coming out today saying that they have ADHD, right? Medical companies have been weaponizing women and their experiences with oppression, their experiences with American society as a mental illness. When you have every right to grieve the fact that you are working a very menial job because you can't afford to work anywhere else to take care of your kids, right? Or you have the right to grieve the fact that, or I don't want to say grieve, I don't want to say be despondent, but you have the right to feel what you feel and to show up in a certain way when you've been abused. No, you're not going to be this very jolly, feminine archetype. How could you possibly fit into that when this is your life and everything that you've gone through? But those are the things that are not validated. And that's where the women's movements fail us, because what are we talking about?